Hi, let's have a closer look at the production function. So here, this is the overall production function. The production depends on the one hand on one input. Let's say the input is labor. V1 then stands for labor. And output also depends on V2, that's another input factor. Let's say V2, the second input factor, is capital, and let's abbreviate capital with capital K for some reasons. And then we can draw the standard production function for both labor and capital. So let's do that now for a second. This is the input of labor, this is the input of capital, and you want to see what is the effect on output, and X stands for output on the vertical axis. So if you increase labor, so if more hours are worked per worker or more workers work, then you start from zero and you go here along the horizontal line. So the more hours, the more worker work, then the more you have of L, capital L, which is labor. And the output is not linearly increasing, it's increasing in a such already well-known form, nonlinear, with diminishing returns of labor. And this is pretty similar to the utility function, which has also diminishing returns, so to say. So it's not like that you, for each additional worker, you have exactly the same output increase, but the output increase, which is in the very beginning pretty large, so let's say that's +1, so this is delta X pretty large, and the more labor you have already, so then +1 is associated with less additional output, delta X. So you see here delta X is smaller than this delta X here. Let's say this is delta X1 and this is delta X2, and this reflects the diminishing returns of additional input. And the same is true then, same reasoning applies here for capital, same story. However, please keep in mind then that in this case, capital is constant. You only increase the input of labor, and here in this case, labor is constant. You only increase the input of capital, and the other input factor remains constant. That's what we call the ceteris paribus clause. So another way to put that is that you look at the slope, right? And you see here the slope of the production function seems to be steeper here than it is here. So here we have a steep, and here we have the flat part of the production function. And the slope of the production function is just derivative of this function with respect to V1, or we said V1 is labor, so it's the derivative of X, of the output, with respect to labor. And you see here the slope is larger here than there. And we can also say, well, that's nothing else than marginal productivity. And the marginal productivity goes down. So once again, for capital, if you increase capital, so in the very beginning, if only a little bit of capital is invested, then your return on input is pretty high, or in other words, the marginal productivity of capital is pretty high. And the more capital is invested into the production process, the lower will be the marginal productivity of capital. Let's say that's the amount capital K1 here, and that's the amount of capital K2 here. So you see it's diminishing return of input or diminishing marginal productivity. That's the core message. So we have a production function with diminishing marginal productivity.